All right, everyone, thank you so much. We're coming up next to our next co-presentation, which is presented by Blue Ocean Brain. So while Claire Herring gets ready to take the virtual stage, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about Claire. So Claire is a well-known writer and international speaker on topics related to the art of leveraging science to optimize employee performance and workplace culture. Key things that we've been talking about all day here. A former Deloitte executive in their national advisory practice, Claire has spent her career serving Fortune 500 companies and large organizations as a consultant, strategist, and business advisor. As CEO of pioneering micro-learning provider Blue Ocean Brain, Claire drives their solution strategy, bringing 21st century learning to companies of all sizes and industries over 50 countries around the globe. I could say much more, Claire, but I would love to have you take it away from here.
That's great. Thank you so much, Charlene. And it's great to be back with everyone at Opal. As others have said today, Opal is one of the favorite venues that we have to connect with all of you. Both Tennille and I have already learned so much from each of you today. And what we hope today is to bring a new perspective as a partner, as a learning vendor, as a company that sits outside of your day-to-day work, but has the opportunity to work with so many of you. And before we dive into the slides, I just wanted to be sure, Charlene, I wanted to make sure Tennille got introduced as well.
Yes. Sorry, apologies about that, Tennille. I'll pop back on. Tennille Boyer will be doing the co-presentation today with Claire. If all of you joined us this morning for our 11 a.m. panel discussion, Tennille drove that conversation earlier, and Tennille is very involved with Blue Ocean Brain's diversity, equity, and inclusion processes and working with DE&I and L&D leaders on a daily basis. So I know that both of you combined are really, truly a powerhouse, and we have a lot to learn today.
Thanks so much. And Tennille, I'm really glad you're here with me because at Blue Ocean Brain, Tennille has the opportunity to talk to hundreds of organizations each year. And so today, what we're going to do is share some lessons learned, some things that we work well. But let's start off really specific to inclusive leadership. We've heard a lot today about not only what diversity and equity and inclusion means, but what belonging means too. And I think it's important to consider that we are asking a lot of our leaders today in the modern world of work. All of us are leaders in some regard, and we like to tell our people, everyone is a leader as an individual contributor. We're leading ourselves. But leaders in your organization have a real challenge right now because they are having to figure out the role that they're going to play. And then they have a tremendous amount of influence in terms of the culture that they create for others. And one of the things on calls that I've been on that occasionally comes up is this sort of feeling, particularly from mid-level leaders, that they're being asked to do something in the sense that they're being asked to think a certain way. Sometimes we'll even see politics brought up as something that is concerning for them in the spirit of talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one of the things that we like to remind those leaders is that each of them has chosen to grow their career at your organization. And as part of that, their job is to live and exude the behaviors of the vision, mission, and values of the organization. So they are making a commitment just by being a part of your workforce to do just that. And I think when it's framed in that way, for anybody that might have a little bit of pushback, which we like to think that no one does, but I think deep down we know there is some at times, that's important. They have to be willing to commit. And when we've seen this done well at organizations, one of the things that I like best is when senior leadership really sends that message and lets people know what's expected in order to align with vision and values. I think the other thing I would say too is, and the oxygen mask metaphor was used a lot today, I mean, leaders are going through a hard time too. And unless senior level, executive level leaders are really supporting them, it's difficult for them to take the next step. So caring for our leaders before really asking them to dig in and do some important work in this space. You know, most of the time it's good to talk about all of the positives and what success looks like. And I think that's absolutely true when we talk about DE&I with leaders. But I think for this audience today, we are the ones on the ground on some level that's trying to affect that change. And we know it's not easy because there are a number of obstacles that we face. And so I wanted to highlight each of these and talk just a little bit about those. First, advantage blindness, whether you call it privilege or access, People whose lives have always been centered around a strong sense of belonging, frankly, do have a hard time seeing just how challenging someone else's lived experience is other than our own. And so the work that we really have to do on the perspective taking front, on the opportunity to give them chances to learn and grow every single day are necessary in order for them to even begin to tackle this advantage blindness that a lot of them have. The second area is fear of loss. There are leaders that resist diversity, equity, and inclusion out of a concern that this will somehow limit their own opportunities. And I think we've all seen it, we've heard it. It's a problem, and it's something that we need to help them look at as not a zero-sum game. Instead, by building into a culture of inclusion, there's actually a lot more opportunity for everyone. The second half of that is the only way forward. If they're going to exude the mission, vision, and values of your organization, they are going to want to not only be aware and become tolerant, which I think we learned today is not enough, but be ready to be an advocate for others. This is one of the toughest questions that tends to come up, and I think it's important that we have a good answer. Shouldn't we hire and promote the best person for the job, regardless of race or gender? You'll hear people say this sometimes, and the correct answer to that is yes and yes. For those of you out there in talent acquisition, you know that unless we start casting a much wider net, being a lot more intentional about our recruiting habits, there's no way that we can ever achieve diversity, much less racial parity, right? The idea that the communities and the people that we serve in terms of percentages really align with the number of individuals we have inside our organization. The other piece of that is, what does best person for the job mean? And we hear sometimes during the hiring process terms like culture fit come up. Is that person a culture fit? Well, that's a great term if we're asking if they align with the vision and values. It's not so great if we mean, will people have the same things to talk about in the break room or over lunch? Does everyone have the same, handicap on the golf course? Those are problems. But when we frame it in the way that the answer is yes, and we begin to talk about how we can get there, then we're making the first strides forward, I think, in helping leaders understand what needs to be done. The third area here is backlash and blame. A lot of individuals, when they get on trainings or even hear the term diversity, equity, inclusion, enable a threat response. And I think we all know biologically that the second the threat response has occurred, our inability to listen or hear anything beyond that has really also occurred. And so as much as we can talk about things in ways that lower the threat response and that we're very intentional about that, the more learning and the more conversation we're going to be able to have. Tennille, did you have a comment about this one?
No, I mean, I feel like I was going to wait kind of until years were over. I mean, I know that this is just a huge element of how and why people will or will not engage, with this type of learning, because if it feels like a hand slap, it does not inspire people to want to come back for more and to continue to peel back this onion, and so this is just a really big piece of kind of what I hear in the actual field and in the learning inside the organization.
Which is why we don't love the term training, right? And we learned today, historically, training was mandatory, compulsory. It had sometimes even a punitive tone. Many of you have seen this Harvard Business Review report that really shows that when we deliver training with the wrong tone, message, and in a mandatory fashion, often it can do more harm than good. So as you are building out your overall DEI strategy, you will be doing a lot of this work in-house with your inclusion teams, your learning teams. But as you look at content and opportunities for people to learn and grow, we have to make sure it's presented in a way that people can actually lean into that content. Number 4, uncertainty. Many leaders, frankly, they have good intent. They're just not sure what to do with it. Now, a lot of you are aware of CEO Action for Diversity. And I think that Tim Ryan at PwC has done a fantastic job. I love the term CEO Action for Diversity. In 2020, after George Floyd's murder, there was a lot of good intent, and there were a lot of words at the senior level leadership sharing just what people's hearts felt. And now that we're in 2021, now is the time, I think, for action. And so part of helping leaders get involved is not just talking to them, but asking them to get involved, asking them to help co-facilitate or co-lead a panel, join an ERG. A lot of these individuals will do it, but they need to be asked because they need to know it's okay for them to participate. This little slide here is just to remind us that it's not helpful to tackle diversity unless we are equally committed to the inclusion and belonging half of the equation. And there's some very good reasons for that. We heard today that when you bring diverse individuals together, you're more likely not to join into groupthink, right? The corporate nod is not going to come as easy. So you're going to have healthy debate and discussion. What you have to also do is be prepared once you've given these people that you've invited to join your organization, the opportunity then to bring their full and authentic selves to work. So a lot of what we can do to really be successful is invest, I think, right now in the inclusion and belonging piece, so that when top talent that happens to be diverse joins the organization, they choose to stay, and their employee experience is one that really sets your organization apart. So before I pass it over to Tennille, a couple other points here in terms of the path forward. We've heard this today. You know, we can't just use a blanket approach. It's really important to diagnose the issues. For many of you, it's probably going to be diversity in the mid to upper level tiers within your organization. We know that that's not a problem we can solve overnight. Just the fact that you can move towards being more transparent and talking with your people, the organization as a whole, in terms of what you're working on, and then not only committing to mentorship, but sponsorship as well. Long-term partnerships where people have an opportunity to grow and move into those roles. And then investing in perpetual learning. We can't say it enough. Yes, we're a learning company, but we truly believe that when companies can bump into great videos like we saw today from Metro Health, a learning leader or a leader rather that has no interest in this topic at all, that bumps into a video like that, immediately has an opportunity to develop some empathy, some understanding of a different lived experience, all of that really important. And then finally, measuring and celebrating along the way. Companies like PwC firms, they've been doing it for decades. So it's not a 6-month or even a 12-month process. It will take a period of time, and it's going to be really important to celebrate those successes. Again, I encourage you to go out to CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, not just to read the pledge, but look at your fellow companies in industry. There are very prescriptive things that they're making transparent and sharing what they're doing, how they're improving the talent acquisition process, how they're improving the overall employee experience. So exciting right now because we're all sharing this information very openly. And then finally, when it comes to learning for your people, I encourage you to be really selective about the learning journeys that you create and make sure you keep them fresh and new. Our brain is addicted to our phones, right? We are addicted because information is new all the time. It is the same when it comes to learning. So leverage that little bit of neuroscience when you are creating a learning experience. And then finally, when you think about topics like bias, think about how you're going to introduce those. Keep the threat response low and really start at a point where people are and then take them on that journey. I think for more intellectual types, when we work with maybe engineering companies who have sort of that engineering mindset, presenting facts and data are important. And then I think there's always the opportunity to share the emotional and more empathetic story as well. And then finally, asking learners at every level what drives their own commitment to inclusion, getting them to open up and share their personal values and talking about alignment with your organization, meeting them where they are, taking an interest in their story as well. We have 11 million meetings every single day in the United States. As a nation, we love to meet, and helping leaders learn how to run inclusive meetings, and that applies to all people. How can a leader become more of a facilitator? Helping leaders understand their power is not by just maintaining control. These are all topics that I would challenge you to think about how you can eject them into the 2021 timeframe. Meetings even in a Zoom world with good design and good preparation, inviting people who may be less represented to be a part of that design process is one way to get the whole idea of belonging to really come to fruition. Finally, no team without trust. We heard psychological safety mentioned quite a bit today. We absolutely want to help leaders understand that if there's no trust in the room, even if it's a homogenous group, we're not going to be able to make any progress. Everybody needs to really spend more time, I think, here before we jump to solving problems together. And I'm going to go ahead at this point, and I'm going to turn off my slides because what I'd like to do is pass this over to Tennille. And again, I rely on Tennille because she has the most conversations with organizations week in and week out, and would love to get some of your perspective, Tennille, in terms of what you see working well out there that you can share with all of us.
Yeah, happy to. And I will caveat all of this to say, I know we're a vendor. I really do not like the sales pitch. I will do my best to not do that. I have my own bias coming into the conversation, to Claire's point, that I do spend my day talking to D&I and L&D leaders. And, this week being Groundhog Day, I'd say that's kind of what my life has been like, especially since June, in terms of so much focus that organizations have here, that I'm just able to share what I see and what works, and certainly through the lens of kind of where we fit into that universe. So I'll do my best to keep the sales elements out of it, but do want you to really see what the real life application does look like, because I think that the power's in the stories of what's working. And I think to Claire's point, and she touched on so many pieces. I mean, hands down, leaders are where the focus is in 2021. I've been in this space for about 4 or 5 years, and this really, the focus to the leader has just really been what's hit hard in the last 12 months for sure. And if we all saw how this last year was, there is 100% this fear of saying the wrong thing, and then maybe they don't say anything as a result, and then that's also the wrong thing. And it has very much come this fear-based, how can I help you, leader, really feel like you can own this conversation in a great way while you're learning for yourself and learning with your team. And so there's kind of 3 things that I would bring up here that I see. And of course, please chat to Shirley and she'll pass it to me if there are questions that come up. But one of the big pieces is what you're asking of them easy. This is just one of a million things, falling on a leader's plate, right? And usually a lot of things they're being asked to do are things they're already naturally good at, and the reasons they're in this role, right? And this is not really that same type of ask necessarily. And so the things that I see working are, to Claire's point, it needs to feel good, it needs to feel positive, it needs to inspire people, because the biggest group that the people I'm talking to want to reach are the people who aren't leaning into this, right? Like, you've got your ERG, BRG leaders, people who are naturally your ambassadors, who are passionate about this, but there's that whole other group that you really are trying to get. And how do I get those people is like how I'm spending my days talking, right? And that audience is critical. And I'm going to assume, with a lot of this, the buy-in that Claire is talking about and everybody has talked about today is a part of this, because we have seen, some scenarios play out where if there's not true, genuine, authentic commitment and support at the most senior level, it just is authentically felt throughout the organization, and it makes it hard to get leaders on board. So I'm going to assume that piece is a part of this. But those leaders really feel like, there's a million things on my plate. What can you give me that is quick and actionable, that is easy for me to have this conversation? And I think that's really where we actually have focused a lot of our efforts, because we've had to, because that's the biggest ask and need for people is, I love that I can kind of talk to my team about what it means to be an ally, happy to share some material with them, but now what do I do? Or what do I say? Or kind of what does that conversation look like? Because they are also peeling back their own onion, and so there's very much this need around making it an easy, digestible piece. And then I'd say on the flip side, not just easy for them and making it easy to find and easy to bump into, also easy for you, as the D&I or L&D leader. I kind of joke that a lot of times, a team we might be supporting is a D&I leader who's a team of 1 or maybe 1.5 if they can borrow an L&D friend. And so that really means that you're usually trying to do a lot with a little, whether it's resources or people. And that is a challenge in and of itself. And so I'd say, what's making it easy for you, because there's so many nuances to consider, right? When you think about an audience that maybe it's a pharmaceutical firm that's got a bunch of desk-sitting employees and a bunch of people on the floor in a manufacturing facility, right? And so even what kind of material are we putting in front of those kinds of leaders, right? It needs to be something action-oriented and easy and quick, that is not using terms like achieving meritocracy, and just very aligned to the audience. I see the biggest focus and the biggest success on the content actually and the learning itself resonating with the end user. You're going to be wanting to think about something very different from a senior leader versus somebody who might be in more of a frontline workforce environment. So those are things that I'd say from a resources perspective, you should be looking for. You need the extra help and the extra eyeballs to be helping you have that heavy lift when it comes to what you're putting in front of people.
And Tennille, you're mentioning, the frontline workforce. When you think about frontline managers, they are leaders, and it's a big ask of them. One of the things we've been so excited to see for some of our companies this year is, you had safety moments. I think, there have been so many industries that have done a great job with safety and having safety moments. We're starting to see inclusion moments, but having that content, some learning in order to enable that frontline manager to grab and go and have the 5-minute stand up is an area we see as a need right now.
It is. I mean, it's very much, we have a lot of clients, whether it's a retail or manufacturing or even in a healthcare environment, there's a stand-up huddle before a shift, right? What is a quick video and a quick exercise that we can give them that they can then go do with their teams that just makes it easy for them to actually execute on this and actually have these conversations with their teams? I'd say that is definitely where the rubber meets the road this year is really making it, is it realistic what I'm asking and practical? And it really needs to be giving them kind of the spoon-fed version of here's how to go do that. And those inclusion moments, Claire, are definitely a great example where those are kind of thought out and they match the audience in that way. And Shirlene, I know there were a couple questions you had messaged me. I just want to make sure I pause to get those because I'll get so excited. I'll just talk till 4 o'clock. So
she will.
Just want to make sure you're having a chance to hand them over.
Yes. Would you like me to read them really quick?
Well, I mean, I want to make sure I'm getting them in while we have some time. I know we're on the clock here.
Okay, perfect. One of them is, I thought the piece about mandatory trainings was interesting, and that has been an ongoing conversation in our organization. I'm curious as to if you've seen any mandatory training work well, and then what does that look like?
Favorite positioning. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say our favorite positioning for that is strongly encouraged. And I think we all know that's a slight difference from mandatory. When it has been mandatory, you already have people understanding sort of the why behind it, that the pushback is lower, but we have seen pushback. What do you think, Tennille?
Yeah, actually there are instances where mandatory training makes a lot of sense and it works well, but I'd say it very much comes back to the messaging. I think, I see a lot of times where the messaging and the positioning of what you're even asking them to do is kind of missed in a way that could create more success. In that, let's say it's a brand new initiative for the first time and we're rolling out a D&I program. And maybe you do want everybody to take a lesson because you want everybody to be on the same page, right? And you want to assign that out so that we understand the same terms and we're using the same language. And it's more of an investment in your people so that they are all able to grow and learn these concepts together. But that really does have to follow on with something continuous from there. And I'd say, the biggest thing I hear every day is how can I sustain all this awesome momentum we've gained in the last 6 to 8 months? And that really does come in the form of just being able to drip out this, learning all throughout the year to give people a chance to take in these concepts and, digest them all throughout the year. But that is where I'd say mandatory training definitely works. I even have a client who takes one of our 10-minute lessons every other month and he assigns them out to the whole leadership population. Because he's like, it is not much for me to ask 10 minutes every other month, just as a quick, I want us to all be focused. They're aligned to their company values. So, there's strategic clarity around that ask. And I think there are instances where it makes sense, but the messaging and the why is really important too. I don't know if you'd have anything else you would add to that, Claire, but.
Okay, perfect. So I'll jump into the next one. We've done a great job of laying a foundation and framework for our DEI strategy and have been really investing in our leaders, but we have a little bit of fear around being able to keep up with the momentum, which is such a huge word right now, the momentum we gained in the last 6 to 8 months because we're such a small team. Any advice for that?
Channeling, it is interesting. And we when we do live events, we get to see the momentum that you and your organizations feel, right? You get 400 people that come to the line. They feel connected, they get off, they've got all this energy. And it's like, what do you do with that energy? I would recommend, in addition to asking everyone to choose to join an affinity group or an ERG, right? As an advocate, as an ally, as a listener, talking a lot about what good allies do. That's one thing that you can do. Getting them to commit to ongoing learning is another good thing. And then we talk a lot about moving from bystander to upstander. So many of us, we're not, negative agents, but sometimes we don't speak up. So we just give them some specific expectations and needs. And people will actually say, hey, let's take a quick time out in a meeting and say, I know you probably didn't mean this, but what I've learned is we're only really listening to 2 voices here in the room. Let's just make sure that everyone has a chance. I mean, that's what an upstander does. So they get to feel like they're helping because they are, and we're asking them to take an action.
Yeah, and I'll share just this one visual. I really feel like this paints a nice picture for, a lot of the conversations that I've had this last year have been, this was already going to be an effort of ours, and we moved it up, right? It became more important, and it became more, just a big focus from the organization. But I want it to feel like a genuine long-term commitment to this conversation and not a Band-Aid reaction to, the events that started in May and June. And so kind of what I'm showing here, wherever you get this type of learning from, really is, I think the visual, maybe because I'm a visual learner, but to kind of be giving that opportunity to continue on and follow on from that momentum, whether it is, live training that you offered or what have you, but giving people that opportunity, I think, to learn and grow in a way that is super digestible. That's what this image is really hoping, to come across for you. So hopefully that visual aid kind of speaks to what we think about when we think about ongoing kind of learning opportunities that can help keep that momentum going throughout the year.
The truth is, people are not going to search for the things they don't know, and you're just not going to search for your unconscious biases. So learning in the flow of work, right? Josh Burson has used that as a concept for years. When it comes to this, it's absolutely true. We have to position learning moments so that people, including our leaders especially, bump into them. You bump into them in an inclusion moment. You bump into them because they're on the home page of your intranet. And whether you build these in-house or you use a partner, positioning is really important. And I would like to say too, if you're building them in-house, you're already very closely aligned with your values because that's your company. When you look at learning partners, make sure that you have a chance to vet the content, to read the content, and make sure their language resonates with the tone and style of your organization. Because there's a lot of great content out there, but if it doesn't ring true for your people, you will have spent money that does not end up getting put to good use. Charlene, any others?
Yes, actually. And I think it piggybacks off of what you had said, right? That, naturally we have team members that are more self-aware and are more engaging and participate in those inclusion moments, as you mentioned. And, this question came in that, it's been easy for us to get people involved in this conversation when they're naturally passionate, self-aware. But how, do you find it hard to engage all leaders? How do you get all leaders on board?
We had a live session with a very large bank, and it was their executive team, including the CEO. And the challenge there was no one had really asked these individuals to get involved in something specific. So I'm not suggesting if you happen to have a negative agent as part of your organization that you put them in charge of your ERG, no. But if you have someone that is leaning in, is demonstrating good intent, go ahead and ask them to join as a panelist the next discussion group. We have had more opportunities to see you in action where someone who wouldn't have been a huge advocate in DEI gets asked to do one thing and they become an evangelist. I don't know. I think you end up exuding the behaviors that you're asking to help be a part of. What do you think, Tennille?
Well, I'd say just the clarity around what you're asking. Leaders are, they're bought into the organization. They're part of the culture because they're there and they love the company and the mission and a million other things. But just be clear in kind of what are you asking? Do you want me to have a half an hour session once a month with my team? Like really specifically, what does that look like to you? What does good look like to you? Because I think part of it becomes when you leave any sort of gray area, it becomes a challenge. And I think for those leaders to Claire's point, they're not Googling their unconscious bias, right? I kind of, say, well, if you want to throw some material in your LMS, that's wonderful. But like, are people diving headfirst into there to kind of, figure out what their recruitment biases might be or what have you, the behavior of that. And so we've seen a big focus on this, meet them where they are, right? And to Claire's point, like plugging it into the intranet and that sort of thing, because that's where if the material is aligned to you as a business and you've taken the time to kind of vet that content and it is this more kind of modern, fresh piece, you will find that you'll get much more engagement. And then we also definitely see that nudge factor, which you'll see, a lot online about in terms of having the material land in front of them and that flow of work. It's just critical, especially now.
Sorry to interrupt you. You made me think of something, but I apologize for interrupting. It's that not invented here, right? When they can discover it, read it, absorb it, and then decide that they agree or that's insightful, then they choose to exude it. That feels very different than other types of ways that people learn things, and leaders especially. I mean, it's great when it can come from them. So letting them discover things is super important.
We have time for one more, Claire. Yeah, thank you for adding that. Let me pull this one up. This has come in. What is that call for the leader to send out to his or her team?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tennille.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say it really is, I'll go back to kind of what I was sharing here. And I think it is very much showing what we are offering, but I don't have another way to answer this question without doing it in this way. When we think about the content and the material you have, whatever you're offering your employees in whatever form that takes, it needs to be easy. You need to be able to share something over with them that creates a basis for conversation as a team. That is hands down the biggest thing that I see is I just need the resources to go have the conversation. I'm happy to have the conversation. I'm excited to, but what does that look like realistically, right? So arming them with the toolkit of those resources to have that conversation is really what leaders, I think, crave today.
And I guess the human factor, what are we asking leaders to do? We're asking them to talk about their own values and how they align with the company, and also to share a little bit about the inclusion journey that they are on. So inclusion by itself is a very broad topic. A lot of meetings today are not inclusive, right? Our culture is the leader stands up or zooms in, says what they think, says it in a way that you pretty soon are doing this and the meeting is over. So we're asking leaders to stop just leading and to also facilitate, to draw out the talent and the authentic selves and all the people that have come to the meeting. And we want to reward and recognize those leaders that get on board. It needs to be a lot more to the positive, I think, than to the negative.
I mean, Tyrone said that earlier today, like being vulnerable. Leaders need to have that, ability to be vulnerable. I know Kenny touched on it too, just that self-awareness of how what you're bringing to your team is important, and for them to see that as well.
Thank you both. Well, I mean, I hope that people are sitting here today and they're writing all of these notes down, and maybe they are having their own aha moment as well. To improve that self-awareness, to improve like, where do I stand as a leader and what I can do to create those inclusive moments and to drive everything forward. So we could chat forever, obviously, but I do need to try to keep us at time. And I really thank you, Tennille and Claire. I want to remind everyone, please go in and visit the exhibit hall. You can learn more about Blue Ocean Brain by going to their virtual booth. As I mentioned, there's resources that you can download, as well as a DE&I e-guide that I saw and a Tumblr as well. So we encourage you to visit. And if you have questions for Claire and Tennille that you didn't get in, go to the lounge and you can message all of our speakers today. So that's the great thing about this. Yes, we can't meet in person. We can't shake hands, but we can still find ways to connect. And I encourage everyone to do that. So thank you, Claire. Thank you, Tennille. I wish you a great rest of your day, and I'll get ready for our next keynote presenter.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.